is a big victory for President Trump and for his party. But what does having Kavanaugh on the bench mean for the court itself? Let's discuss it now. Carl Bernstein is here, Abigail Tracy, and David Kaplan. David is the author of the book, The Most Dangerous Branch Inside the Supreme Court's Assault on the Constitution. Now that is the name of a book. Okay, thank you all for joining us. So, Carl, I'm going to start with you because President Trump has been remarkably effective in reshaping the court, not just the Supreme Court, but even the appellate level, right? Even statewide, he's been appointing conservative judges. So he's going to get a conservative justice now. So it's good for Trump, but is it good for the country?
Well, I think this whole process has been awful for the country in the following way. I mean, I listened, like most Americans, I think, to Susan Collins' civics lesson today. And what I did not hear from Susan Collins in the civics lessons was anything about Donald Trump and how he conducted himself through this search for a justice. Anything about what Judge Kavanaugh said that was an offense to the senators and an offense to the court, as well as an offense to the truth during his confirmation hearings. By offense to the truth, I'm not going to address the specifics of Dr. Ford, but rather about his life. There was an FBI investigation that has been constrained by the White House and the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee. And like the Mueller investigation, the President of the United States does not want to see the truth, whatever it is, wherever it leads. And I'm not going to say where it leads because I don't know. But the President, those on that committee, on the Republican majority, did not want that FBI investigation to go forward in an open way to whatever conclusions it should have by talking to the proper people, including Kavanaugh and Ford.
Yeah. So, as I said in the open, no one really came out of this looking good.
This is part of, my colleague Bob Woodward has called this a war on truth in this presidency, and this is part of it. We had the opportunity with what Flake and his colleagues did by calling for this investigation to find out what we needed to know.
But sticking with the courts, because I want to play this moment. I think it's important. This is Justices Kagan and Sotomayor. They were at an event today. They spoke about the image of the court. Watch this.
It's an incredibly important thing for the court to guard is this reputation of being fair, of being impartial, of being neutral, and of not being simply an extension of the terribly polarized political process and environment that we live in. And this is a challenge.
Now we're eight justices, that we have to rise above partisanship in our personal relationships, that we have to treat each other with respect and dignity and with a sense of amicability that the rest of the world doesn't often share.
David, the significance of both of them speaking out now.
Well, this was a previously scheduled appearance at Princeton, and no doubt they're both upset that they had to be there in the current maelstrom. But Carl mentioned this is bad for the country. This is terrible for the Supreme Court. And those two justices and all the others recognize that they will now be in the center of the storm for years and potentially decades. They hate this. This further politicizes the institution, but at the end of the day, as I argue in the book, they're fundamentally responsible. The reason Supreme Court hearings have become a circus, the reason a single vacancy is so freighted, is because the court, for decades now, has insinuated itself into so many key social and political issues instead of deferring to Congress and state legislatures.
Abigail, Jeffrey Toobin here on CNN emphatically says that Roe v. Wade will be overturned perhaps as soon as in the next couple of years. Do you agree with him, with that assessment?
Well, I think obviously today you saw both Murkowski and Collins come out and say that they didn't believe that Kavanaugh would do that. I think one of the interesting things when you look at the, the departure of Kennedy and now if Kavanaugh is officially confirmed, sort of how that changes the dynamic. I've spoken with a number of sort of experts on the court who say that, somebody like John Roberts, he might not want to see sweeping social change or a really frontal attack on something like Roe v. Wade, but there's a lot of ways that you can sort of tear down the law and the ruling, sort of, killing it with a million paper cuts type of a thing.
I would disagree with Jeff. I think Roberts and probably Kavanaugh will not vote to explicitly overturn Roe, but they will still uphold any number of more restrictive regulations.
It'll be challenged on the state level?
Well, it will be, but there'll be a particular a state regulation that cuts back on the right, and they'll uphold that, but they won't explicitly overturn Roe because they don't have to.
Well, this is what I have been saying when I talk about the representation of the court, because in the last two elections, let's see, in 6 out of the 7 last elections, excuse me, I'm wrong, 6 out of the 7, Republicans have lost the popular vote, yet they're on the verge, Carl, of having a 5-4 conservative on the conservative side. Do they risk the court being out of step with Americans politically?
Well, the president gets to appoint the justices of the Supreme Court, and of course it was denied, that opportunity was denied by the Republicans in the Garland case during the Obama administration by the Republicans. I think the idea of the court being a reflection of the people is not really the notion of the court we need to consider. That what we want to look at is the history of the court in terms, going back, say, to Brown versus Board of Education, in dealing with the great problems of this country and applying the Constitution to those problems, and establishing a body of law that is consistent with the history of the country, with the history of the Constitution, and also somewhat reflective of what is going on socially and culturally in the country. We now have a court, if it moves to the right, as far as some people think it might, that might no longer be that reflection. At the same time, now this is probably just whistling at nothing, but Susan Collins today, in what she said about the paragon that she thinks that Judge Kavanaugh is, both legally and in terms of his person, has given him an opportunity to succeed Justice Kennedy and be a swing vote. Now, I don't believe it's going to happen, but I suppose it's possible. But everything she said would establish Kavanaugh in that mold if it were true about Kavanaugh. But what we have just witnessed is a triumph of Donald Trump. Donald Trump set the tone, the horrible, hideous tone for all of this, the disinterest in the truth, the disinterest in following through with the FBI investigation in a meaningful way, mocking Professor Ford in a way that inflamed his base and took the day. I don't think there's much question about it. If you talk to Republicans on the Hill, they will tell you it was the President of the United States who set the tone and enabled us to pull this thing through without having a real FBI investigation. Let's look at the question of blackout drinking, which is one of the reasons those senators wanted an investigation in the first place.